Get away from her, you
From its pulse rifles and motion trackers to its spaceship hallways and monster nests, all building up to that climactic boss battle, it's safe to say the original 1986 film Aliens is one of the video gamiest movies ever. While countless games have borrowed ideas from Aliens, in some case flat out ripping it off, there's also a sizable library of officially licensed games that have attempted to recapture the fun of the film in an interactive space, some doing so more successfully than others. Here are 8 things you probably didn't know about Aliens games. The Alien franchise spawned a hive's worth of full-grown xenomorph video games, but plenty more have been torched while still in their larval form. Some remains have been smuggled out of their respective holding facilities, leaked onto the internet for fans to dissect and examine. Here are just a few of the Aliens games that have had their development preemptively nuked from orbit before they could crawl onto store shelves. Obsidian Entertainment, whose work on Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 and South Park The Stick of Truth showed the studio knew how to turn existing properties into solid RPGs. After obtaining the license, Sega put the studio to work doing the same for Aliens. Aliens Crucible was intended to be a third-person action RPG, and it looked like it was pretty far along based on what we've seen in leaked gameplay. A more horror-flavored take on Mass Effect, Crucible followed a group of colonists on a xenomorph-infested world. Crew members could be impregnated by facehuggers, and the player would have to decide to kill them, put them in cryosleep to buy them time, or just let the chestburster eventually do its thing, and crew members would stay dead. Also, xenomorphs would be able to attack at any time, even during conversations with NPCs.
Quit flirting! We've got incoming!
While it's a shame that Sega pulled the plug on an ambitious project like Crucible, it was allegedly so more resources could be funneled into Alien Isolation, which is widely considered to be one of the best Alien games ever. Despite the controversial IGN review that somebody is still complaining about in the comments of this video. I didn't review the game, go away. Disney's purchase of 20th Century Fox caused at least 2 other Aliens projects to hit a dead end. One of these was Hadleys Hope, which was being developed by Slipgate Ironworks and 3D Realms. Hadley's Hope, named after the settlement in the film, was a cooperative first-person shooter akin to Destiny, with players controlling colonists and space marines raiding xenomorph hives to unlock new gear. The twist? They could play as the xenomorph hive mind instead, controlling multiple facehuggers to infect humans and ordering drones around to protect their hive's queen. Meanwhile, in a now-deleted Twitter exchange with one of the Hadley's Hope developers, Gears of War creator Cliff Bleszinski revealed that his now-defunct studio Boss Key Productions had also been in talks with Fox to develop an Aliens game that would have scrapped all the canon from Alien 3 forward, following an older version of Newt fighting weaponized xenomorphs that had run amok in a Weyland-Yutani facility on Earth. The infamous shit sandwich that was Gearbox's Aliens Colonial Marines has been the subject of much discussion and several lawsuits, but amazingly, it wasn't actually the first game to be called Aliens Colonial Marines. Way back in May of 2001, EA announced a PlayStation 2 game with the exact same title. Like the game that would eventually come out 12 years later, this other Colonial Marines was a first-person shooter that acted as a direct sequel to Aliens. Its most novel mechanic was the ability to command AI squad mates into different formations, though from IGN's 2001 E3 preview, it didn't sound particularly groundbreaking, also noting some major frame rate issues. Colonial Marines was slated for a fall 2001 release, but was subsequently delayed, and in October 2002, it was officially canceled, with no official reason given. Had it actually come out, would this Colonial Marines have been received any better than Gearbox's infamous Trainwreck? It's impossible to say, but its developer Check 6 Games closed shortly after the cancellation, with only a poorly received Spyro sequel to its name. Now, as for Aliens games that actually did come out, the erroneously named Alien Trilogy was released on PS1 and Sega Saturn in 1996, very loosely adapting the second and third Aliens films into a passable Doom clone that got a decent reception at the time of its release. However, it's most notable for being some of the earliest use of motion capture in game development. Acclaim had been hyping up its cutting-edge performance capture technology as early as January of 1994, but most of the evidence is grainy home video footage and blurry screenshots from gaming magazines. Alien Trilogy's in-game graphics aren't much to write home about and look more like the rotoscope sprites from Acclaim's other games at the time. The pre-rendered cutscenes in Alien Trilogy are another story, and while the models and textures look dated, the character movement is impressively fluid and doesn't have as much of that distinctive floatiness that was common in mid-90s computer animation. Much has been said about the controls for Alien Resurrection on PS1. The GameSpot review famously complained about how disorienting it was to use the left analog stick for movement and the right stick for camera control, which is something we all now take for granted. But amazingly enough, Alien Resurrection's first-person perspective was a very late addition during development. The earliest iteration of the game was an isometric shooter similar to Loaded, but after that was fairly far along, developer Argonaut was pressured by 20th Century Fox to switch to a third-person view, presumably to capitalize on the popularity of Tomb Raider. The amount of work from the isometric version that had to be scrapped was a blow to studio morale, and a lot of the team left the project. The third-person iteration got far enough along that it was shown off at E3, boasting a roster of playable characters from the film voiced by their actual actors and a novel mechanic that allowed them to shoot backwards while running to fend off pursuing aliens. Unfortunately, this version suffered due to the technical limitations of the hardware and lacked suspense since players could see aliens sneaking up on them. But then, someone, allegedly a tester named Ben Borth, suggested a first-person camera and it all clicked. The limited field of view ratcheted up the tension, and not having to render a player character's model and animations freed up resources to improve the experience elsewhere. Sadly, the amount of time spent in development hell meant that the official Alien Resurrection video game tie-in didn't hit store shelves until 3 years after the movie debuted in theaters, to a mediocre reception from critics and audiences, and mild outrage from hardcore fans. Argonaut Games might have been a little late to the party for the Alien Resurrection game, but it developed another piece of software that launched day and date alongside the movie, or rather, in the movie itself. As part of the deal to produce the video game tie-in, Argonaut agreed to develop a simple playable game, Atom Zone, for the arcade cabinet seen briefly aboard Ron Perlman's ship Betty. Sadly, upon seeing the film, Atom Zone's designers were disappointed at how small of a role it had. They'd spent several frantic days developing the game, including rendering 3 unique CGI ships from scratch, which was likely an even bigger undertaking 25 years ago than it is now. Shortly after the theatrical release of Aliens, Activision published Aliens, the computer game for Commodore 64, which loosely adapted the film's plot into a series of minigames. And though it was available in Japan, Squaresoft got the rights to develop and publish a second, completely different Aliens game, which took a different approach. Built for the MSX in 1987, Aliens, Alien 2 is a platformer that features Ripley running around zapping bugs, fighting a queen alien at the end of each level before saving Newt and living happily ever after. It clearly drew some inspiration from Metroid and Contra, which had been released months earlier. That might have raised some eyebrows if those games hadn't cribbed so much from Alien and Aliens to begin with. In any case, what's most significant about the MSX game is less the game itself, but rather who worked on it. Immediately after completing Aliens, 3 of the team members would shift their focus to a new Squaresoft project called Fighting Fantasy, which was eventually renamed Final Fantasy for legal reasons. Takashi Tokita and Hiromichi Tanaka would go on to work on numerous titles in the long-running RPG series, as well as other Square classics like Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger. Meanwhile, that little Aliens game for MSX was scored by none other than Nobuo Uematsu, who would of course go on to create some of the most recognizable video game music of all time. Much like the xenomorph species itself, the Aliens franchise has proven hard to kill off, and has been the subject of nearly as much greedy corporate meddling. Hopefully, Disney takes some cues from Weyland-Yutani and keeps these perfect organisms alive for further study for years to come. Ideally, in the form of a new game every now and then. In the meantime, if you're after more trivia about games infested by slimy murderous creatures, check out our videos on things you probably didn't know about the Metroid and Resident Evil series. And with that, this is Max, lone narrator of this video, signing off.